Hey everybody, how you doing? It is Monday, March 27th. This is ITK Radio, In the Know Radio. I'm with my good friend, someone who I admire immensely, and someone who I enjoy spending a lot of time with, Ada Polla. Ada, how are you today? Where are we finding you?
Good morning, Mark. Happy Monday. Thanks for having me.
Happy Monday.
I am in very glamorous Hammond, Louisiana, which is where I spend quite a bit of my time, as my husband's business is based here. So we go back and forth between Hammond and Georgetown.
I love it. Now, for our global audience, I mean, I'm well aware of the beauty and locale of Hammond, but can you be a little more precise? Where is Hammond in relationship in Louisiana? If you were speaking to somebody in London, where would you tell Hammond is?
I would tell them it's about an hour north of New Orleans, which is, what most people know of Louisiana. It is the city where Southeastern University is, so it's a college town. It's very much typical Southern place. To give you an idea, we have a yard, and in our yard we have chickens, which obviously we do not in Georgetown. So here we are.
I do think, you will have to agree, you're one of the most unique couples in that you and your husband are running very dynamic, interesting family businesses that are headquartered. And I think, to me, the geography of them is really kind of important. Your company, Alchimie Forever, has a big presence in Georgetown, the neighborhood in Washington, D.C. I don't want to overstep, but I mean, like I said, I think geography and being part of a community, it's really important. And maybe as a CEO, having exposure to Louisiana as well as, kind of cosmopolitan global DC, I'm going to guess that probably helps you as a CEO.
It definitely helps to be exposed to, very different neighborhoods and very different communities, and truly, and I love them both. So I speak with love of Georgetown and with love of Hammond, but you could not find two more different places, one from the other. And you're right, the geographies I think matter. And for my business, for Alchimie Forever, the fact that we're based in Washington, D.C., more specifically in Georgetown, was a very personal decision of mine. I fell in love with D.C. when I moved to that place in 2002. And I never wanted to leave. And I figured that running a beauty business, I would be mostly on the road. So the one thing that was important was to be near a big airport for ease of travel, but that the rest didn't really matter. And I always get questions, oh my God, you're a beauty brand based in DC. This is so strange. Why are you not in New York? Everyone thinks that the only place you can be if you're a business brand, a beauty brand, is in New York. And I do go to New York very frequently, but I love being in DC. And then the other part of my brand's geography is also Switzerland. As you mentioned, we're a family business. We started out in Switzerland. I was born and raised in Switzerland until I came to the U.S. for college, and we still, we have offices in Geneva as well. My father, who's the brains behind our formulations, still is in Geneva and has his dermatology office and our medical spa Forever Institute in Geneva. So that's even a third piece of the geography of my life.
No, I love it. Yeah, I mean, I'm curious about, as we were talking, like organizing this call. I think that, well, I know. I mean, I'm a kid who grew up in the industrial Midwest. I grew up in Detroit, and the world, in the 80s and 90s was like so large and so vast, and like even my access for information was in some ways limited just to National Geographic or magazines. And I visited Switzerland in my teen years, but it always left a huge impression on me. And I think the relationship between the U.S. and kind of Europe is very interesting in the sense that the U.S. still does look to Europe for a lot of quote unquote more civilized ways to living. And I'm curious how you wrestle with being a Swiss brand or being a Georgetown brand in your conversations, or is it more of a chameleon decision, what you want to lead with based on what the customer wants to hear?
I definitely think the conversation is different when speaking to someone in Switzerland versus someone in the US. I think for the majority of Americans, and again, this is a gross generalization, but for the sake of argument, bear with me. I think for most Americans who have heard of Switzerland and who understand the difference between Sweden and Switzerland. Switzerland is something, sorry, I had
that
to
is amazing. That is pretty, I
know,
didn't even think that was possible, but that's pretty funny. Okay, sorry to interrupt. That's good.
It comes up more frequently than you would think. So anyway, for people who have heard of Switzerland, I think they have, quite positive associations with the country. People think beautiful mountains and skiing, so kind of purity of nature and of the scenery, high-tech manufacturing with watches, sometimes even with pharmaceuticals, so beautiful nature, high-tech, of course, very, as you use the word civilized, very civilized. I get a lot of comments, oh my God, isn't it so expensive in Switzerland? So some version of luxury or high-end civilization. And those are all things that translate beautifully in terms of skincare. We're a botanically based brand, so the idea of beautiful Swiss nature is definitely relevant. We're also steeped in science and in medicine, so the idea of high-tech manufacturing is definitely relevant. And I wouldn't say we're a luxury brand, but we like to think that our products are very luxurious, and so that kind of high-end civilized aspect of the culture also is very relevant. Of course, when I'm speaking to someone in Switzerland, they're much more interested by the fact that our biggest market is the United States, and the conversation there is different because all those assumptions are not assumptions anymore. They're what people live their life, their day-to-day Swiss life in. And so there, the appeal and kind of the exotic part is more, being based in DC and in Georgetown and all of the aspects that appeal to Europeans from an American perspective.
Yeah, I want to get back to Switzerland, but let's get back to DC for a second. I mean, I've lived here now, well over 20 years. I've lived here longer than I've lived anywhere else. And, I guess I'm a citizen, I'm a Washingtonian, but I've never really, I still keep in touch with my Michigan roots, which is kind of interesting. DC can be a bit transitory, and it's very interesting. I tell people like DC is where every high school class president comes to live. It's a very serious, but very intellectually stimulating. I wouldn't say it's the most fashion forward place in the world, but I do feel like the people that are into fashion, into design, really find themselves. And I'm wondering if you could speak to, whereas in New York or say LA, where it's so in your face, does it help being in let's say, I want to say less competitive market? I mean, DC is intense, but where fashion isn't like the number one thing, or design or branding isn't the number one business. Have you found that to be an asset, or is it forced you to kind of push yourself to make connections, or to, how do you stay on top of that, if you will, if it's not so in front of your face?
Well, I think it's actually it's not super relevant one way or another. And I'll tell you why. We distribute our products throughout the United States. So we don't have a larger presence in DC proper than anywhere else. If anything, we're more distributed, for example, in New York and LA than we are in DC, just because of the nature of the marketplace. And like I said, I spend probably 3 out of 4 weeks every month on the road. This obviously, there was a bit of a pause during COVID and even in 2021. But starting last year, the frequency of my travels is almost back to how it was pre-COVID. And so I am on the road. I am in LA, I'm in New York. Also, I'm in Atlanta, I'm in Dallas, I'm in Chicago. So, all of the larger markets we have presence and I spend time in. So I don't think being based in DC is anything that truly impacts the business strategy, other than people always are surprised about it. So it's a good kind of conversation starter. But from a strategic perspective, I don't think that it really matters one way or another.
I do sense too, and I don't know if you agree, but I do sense DC's gotten much more dynamic in the last decade, much more cosmopolitan, there's more aspects of the city. It feels like a richer environment between business, commerce, government, culture, which is kind of exciting to see. So yeah, I mean, you're feeling the same vibe, right?
Totally. And I think we've been in DC for a similar amount of time. I've been there since I moved in 2002. So
Right.
over 20 years, and certainly DC is not the same city today that it was, in 2002. And I think for the better, more. I mean, DC's always been about culture, but it's more fashion forward now than it was then. More trendy restaurants, some outposts of restaurants, that are even New York first restaurants, if you will, and more magazines, just a little bit more of the New York in DC, if you will.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. But it's still, I think, on an upside, DC, for me, I find it to be just such a livable place. There's so much green space. It's easy to get around, great access to metro, airports, train. It's
Totally.
great. So you don't have some of the big city issues, say New York. Getting back to Switzerland, and obviously, we've chatted about, you and me have chatted about your origin story, and I wish you could touch on that and just like how important the family aspect is, and then just the nature of Switzerland. You mentioned, the idea between science, high tech, how that kind of wraps itself in. And the reason I bring this up, I was chatting with an entrepreneur the other day, and she had already kind of launched her product, and I was asking about her origin story, and she hadn't really formulated one yet, and we're in season 1 out. And I was suggesting to her that can be the real basis of your business, because even when your business isn't going great, and there's going to be days when you're like, why am I doing this? This is totally insane. How the origin story can help you internally, help the business, the team internally, but also externally when you're telling your story. So can you address the power of an origin story?
Yes, of course. And I know this is something that you've helped me with over the years. As you'll hear in a minute when I go into it, our origin story is incredibly genuine, and it's not made up, meaning it's not made up by a team of marketers that sat in a boardroom, and did focus groups and decided this is the origin story of this brand that we're launching. And not that there's anything wrong with that, that there's room for this, of course, but this is not how we came about. So our origin story starts with my father. He went to medical school in Switzerland, and then we came to the US in the mid-'80s. I was 6 at the time. He did his postdoctoral fellowship at Mass General Hospital in Boston, Massachusetts, which is, important in my story as well, because it's those 2 years in Boston that made me want to come back to the U.S. for college. And here I am 20 plus years later. So the origin story involves medical school in Switzerland, coming to the U.S., Mass General Hospital, specifically the Wellman Lab, which is a lab at MGH where where lasers for use in dermatology were created or invented.
Wow.
By
okay.
this amazing,
I didn't know this part of the story. This is amazing.
Yeah, by this man who is still alive, Professor Rox Anderson, who my father had the great privilege of working with. And, from my father's perspective, he always says it's a right time, right place luck story that he ended up being able to do his postdoctoral fellowship at that time, in that place, with that person. But this led to my father being the first physician to bring laser technology from the US back to Europe. And that's when, after 2 years in Boston, we went back to Geneva. He opened his solo derm practice. And for a few years, he was the only physician to have laser technology available for use on the skin. And so, initially, now people think lasers and think tattoo removal, hair removal, wrinkle removal, what have you. But initially, lasers were used in a much more medical setting for the treatment of hemangiomas and port wine stains in infants and toddlers. So big, red, debilitating birthmarks in kids, which, if left untreated, could lead to some serious medical issues. And so my father was seeing kids, from all over Europe. The parents were bringing them to him to get these birthmarks treated. And these treatments would create heat and inflammation and pain and redness in the skin, which is how lasers worked. And he couldn't find a product to help heal the skin of these poor children post-treatment. And so he enlisted a friend of his who owns a compounding pharmacy in Geneva down the street from where our medical spa is. And they created a post-procedure product, which we still have today, called our Cantic Brightening Moisture Mask, which is, still to this day our hero product. So the story, and this product is the reason why in the end we created a skincare brand. But for many years, we just had this product, and then my dad had a couple other ideas for other kind of specialty products, including what is now known as our firming gel for neck and bust.
Right.
And so he created products based on his patients' needs without ever thinking about making this a brand. And then I got involved, and I thought, why not make this a brand? Why not bring these amazing formulations to more people, not only to those lucky patients of my father? And here we are. And again, that was in the mid '80s. People always ask me, well, when did your company start? And because it's such a messy story, I never know how to answer. I mean, you can say, did it start after I graduated from business school in 2004? Did it start when my father created that first product? That would be the late 1980s. Like a true family, organic family business story. It's a little bit more complicated than, okay, this one day, this one year, we all sat down and we said, we are starting a company. That's not how it happened.
Do you think your dad had, do you think he needed your push to be like, hey, Dad, like, let's take this out? More people should benefit from this. How did that come about? Was he resistant to it, or do you think he needed a little push, or did it help to have an outside voice, so to speak?
He wasn't resistant. It's just not anything he had ever considered.
Yeah.
Not for being resistant about it, but just he's a dermatologist. He spends his day seeing patients and treating skin. He is not an entrepreneur. He opened his derm practice in a medical spa, so in a way that is him being an entrepreneur. But he wouldn't describe himself as an entrepreneur or as a business person. And so he was just, making product that would help the skin of his patients be better. That was his goal.
When did you say, like, yeah, there's something here? When did you, like, when you were in business school or before you went to business school, were you wrestling with, hey, I want to do something business creative, right? But were you like, yeah, it's finally, like, we have a product here, let's make this work? What was the light bulb in your mind that said?
Yeah, so in my mind, this came about actually during business school. So, I came back to the US, I went to college, and then I worked in consulting. Then I worked in the medical device field for a couple years. And then I decided to go to business school, which is what brought me to DC. I went to Georgetown McDonough School of Business. And during business school, I thought, you know what? I want to be involved in my family's business. Initially, I thought I would open a chain of medical spas here in the US, similar to what we have in Switzerland. And so that was the first business plan I wrote. But the CapEx needed was just so scary to me. I couldn't do it. And so I thought, okay, well, that's a bit too much. So we have these, at the time, I think it was 5 products. We have these 5 random products that we're not really doing much with. What about if I took those and made them into a brand and started distributing them? So this whole kind of ideation and then the business plan and the start of all this was, between 2002 and 2004, which were my business school days. And in 2004, I had my first sales meeting. I got my first order, and we're almost 20 years later. And sometimes it feels like it's been 5 centuries, and sometimes it feels like we're still kind of in startup mode. So the timing of it is a bit strange.
I actually didn't know it was like 20 years. Like, that seems like, that's a decent amount of time, but it's not that much time. That's like what's interesting about business. Let's talk about the comms around kind of business. You yourself ran a great blog, Adamant About Beauty. You've written for publications. You're out speaking. You've been interviewed. So I'm curious about that side of it, but also you're very intentional about the packaging and the use of color. I have a philosophy about always be communicating, right? That is, everything that happens offline is equal to online. And, we're in this very holistic environment, and you need to find different opportunities to get in front of your audience, whether it's writing a blog post, whether it's speaking at a conference, doing a silly pod like this, or, making a presentation to a potential big investor. So can you talk about just the general communications aspect of your career and as your role as a CEO?
Yes, I think this is the $1 million question, so to speak. I think we are still, and we just said it's been almost 20 years. We are still probably one of the best kept skincare secrets in the industry, which is not exactly the goal. If I'm being perfectly honest, the goal is to have Alchimie be more known and be in more people's bathrooms and be used by more people, so that we can make a difference in their skin the way that which is our mission in life. And so as it is, I think in most industries, but I think probably even more in consumer packaged goods, and then even more in beauty, communicating in a way where you're actually reaching your audience and making that, making an impression for your audience is the most challenging thing that there is. I mean, if you think about all of the communication that we all receive on a daily basis from all of these brands that are trying to make a mark in our mental space of brands that we love, brands that we use.
Right.
This is incredibly challenging. And I think in beauty, and it's different today than it was 20 years ago, with social media, obviously. And I think there's also so much noise around influencers starting beauty brands, and even celebrities starting beauty brands. I mean, I think 2022 was like the year of all of the celebrities who decided, okay, let's go start a beauty brand, a skincare brand, a makeup brand, because why not? Because we can. And I think that just takes up so much space in this field of communication that it does make it more challenging for smaller, more indie, more niche brands like Alchimie Forever to be able to become better known. But as you said, always be communicating, and in every way possible. I'm more of a writer and a reader, but I know that today video content is king. And so, we've tried to shift our communication to be more where the customer is, which is consuming video rather than blog posts or longer form writing. So it's also always a question of adapting and speaking in the method that your customer wants to hear from you and in the platforms where he or she is. So definitely it's been an evolution of communication, and it's not the same. We've gone through lots of different phases of communication over the last 20 years.
Yeah, you're spot on about I tell people it doesn't really matter what you like to do. It really matters where your audience is. Like, you got to play where they want to play. And as you say, you may love to write, but video or photo might be better. I think one of the most interesting things you do, I mean, you talked about how much you do travel and you're out and about, is I've just noticed on your Insta, when you're like popping into a shop, you may just take a quick photo. But also, like, you take photos with other, I guess, technicians or other kind of skin professionals. Like if you're at a beauty salon or if you're at a Walgreens, if you will, and you're kind of meeting with the staff, I think those photos are really great. They're very personal. It's almost like it's a memory, and you're also giving recognition to the other people involved in the process. It's not just you selling the product, but you're also depending on people on the floor of this various retail stores to sell the product, but you're giving them recognition in your Instagram stories. I don't know if you are doing that intentionally, but I think it's a really great tool, and I actually like to see them. And it's cool for me to see you out and about chatting with different people.
Mm-hmm. No, we definitely do that very intentionally. And, the people who recommend Alchimie, whether they be beauty advisors in retail or estheticians in the treatment room, these are our most amazing resource in terms, again, of spreading the word about the brand, of getting the brand in front of people who may not know of us yet. And so they are our brand ambassadors, and they deserve recognition and gratitude. And we've always thought of them that way. And again, whether it's in a retail setting or in a spa setting, as we are multi-channel, both of these groups of amazing people have a place in our strategy, and ultimately without them there is no brand. And so It's fun to visit with them. It's probably one of my favorite parts of my job, is to be out in the field with estheticians and beauty advisors and to hear their feedback, to learn from them, to share, my passion and my knowledge about the brand, and to be able to say thank you, because again, they're an essential part of that communication strategy we were speaking of.
Can you talk about, the Cody's of the world, LVMH, Estee, they're kind of buying up all these brands and they're becoming like a house of brands, versus being independent and kind of wrestling with, do you take outside capital? How do you wrestle with that in terms of from a communications and also a business strategy standpoint? Like when you speak with your board and your teams, like saying, listen, this is our lane, this is where we're going to go, or are there some days where you're like, wow, it'd be really nice to have, a huge, more money to help with marketing?
For sure. I think, quite honestly, I go through both. While it would be really great to have a big pot of money and be able to grow more quickly and invest more in marketing. And then I also have the opposite piece, which is, wow, it's really nice to actually be independent and be in control of our own destiny, because the minute that you take outside funding, it comes with strings attached.
Right.
What kind of strings and how tight are those strings obviously will depend on each deal, but there will be strings attached. And I think something that I think about a lot is pick your hard. And I think about this.
Oh, I like that.
From a personal standpoint to a professional standpoint. So for example, professional standpoint, pick your hard. It's hard to be independent and underfunded. It's hard to never miss payroll. It's hard to work with small budgets. It's hard to grow quickly with small budgets. And then when you have funding, those things aren't hard, but you have different hard things. So it's hard to grow at the pace that your investors require you. It's hard to make decisions with a long-term view because their view is short-term. It's hard to maintain control of, the brand. So it's like, pick your hard. Which hard do you want? It's not something's easy or something's hard. Everything is hard. And I think of this also, in my personal life, for example, it's hard to be skinny and it's hard to be overweight. Again, pick your hard. Like, which hard do you want? Do you want the hard of the discipline of, not eating dessert after every meal? Or do you want the hard of not feeling comfortable and as healthy as you could in your body because you're overweight? So it's like everything is hard, which, it can sound a bit depressing. I don't think it's depressing. I just think this is the reality of life in general. And then to frame things in that sense always helps me, especially on those days where I'm like, shoot, I really wish I had a big pot of money and we were growing faster. Right. And then I have to remind myself that would come with all kinds of other issues. So pick your hard.
I love it. I'm actually, God, that's a great, that's a really good one. I've never heard you say that. I actually love that.
I'm glad after these 20 years of friendship we've had, I can still tell you things that you haven't heard me say before.
I love it. No, it's great. Well, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I just want to wrap up. I'm really curious about, if you could just talk about business school. I just love business school. I went myself, and I was in Darden down in Charlottesville last weekend, just wandering around. And I don't know, there's just something to me magical about business school and just people in an academic, intellectual setting thinking about business. I just find it really energizing. So if you could kind of talk about your business school experience. And I'm also really curious just how you organize your day. You're very focused, you're very serious, but you're also very fun. I don't want to, I don't want our people, you are loads of fun. And you plan travel. I think when I think about you, you're very focused, but I do think the planning you do is exceptional, and I do think that helps you punch above your weight, so to speak. I don't know. Can you chat about that?
Yes, thank you. So let me address your business school question first. For me, business school served I went to business school for two reasons. The first was I figured if I started this brand thing and all else failed, I would have, an additional really nice piece of paper that would make me more hireable. Right. So it was almost like an insurance policy of, then, I can go and start my business. And if it doesn't work, then I'll go and I'll show this nice piece of paper to a big company and I will get hired. And then the second piece of it was for a self-confidence, from a self-confidence perspective, thinking about, I started a beauty brand. I had no experience in beauty. And my father to this day still tells me that I probably would be much further ahead if I had done what he told me to do, which is to go work at Estee Lauder or L'Oreal for a few years before. We still have that debate. It will never end. But anyway, I did not follow his advice. And so I started a beauty brand without having worked in beauty or in consumer packaged goods before. And
Right.
I was just self-aware enough in the early 2000s to realize that might be challenging. And so I thought, well, I don't want to go work for Estee Lauder or L'Oreal, but I'll go to business school and I'll take some marketing classes and some finance classes, and I'll probably be better armed to start this entrepreneurial journey of mine. So I had two super specific reasons to go to business school. And then my business school experience was fantastic in the sense that it was in DC, and it was, I came to DC for business school, and I fell in love with the city and the neighborhood of Georgetown so much. I never wanted to leave. And then I ended up doing all of my entrepreneurial, like it really was an entrepreneurial MBA. I took all the entrepreneurship classes I could. I wrote 2 business plans during business school. I had the benefit of, having my peers, other students, agree to take my idea as the business plan idea that we were going to write, et cetera, et cetera. So it was incredibly helpful from the perspective of starting Alchimie Forever. And so it's 2 years that I have incredibly fond memories of. And I'm still in touch with a number of my business school friends, much more actually than I am with my undergrad friends. So it created also a very tight-knit group for me. And then, to your point about how I organize my days, I think I am incredibly intentional, sometimes too much so, some people say. And so I plan everything. The day before, I plan my day, the next day, but to the point where I'm like, okay, when I wake up, this is the first thing that I'm going to do. This is the first project I'm going to work on. And I find that it's almost like a visualization of how my day will start the next day. It makes my mornings so calm because it removes, like, I don't wake up and open my email and think, okay, what am I going to do today? I already know what I'm going to do today, especially what I'm going to start doing. And, one of the things that, like what I was saying before, pick your heart. Another thing that I think about a lot, I love Mark Twain. He has so many quotes that I refer to, but one of the ones that I love is eat the frog for breakfast. And, the idea of that is do the hardest thing first. And he said, if it's your job to eat a frog, do it in the morning. And if it's your job to eat 2 frogs, start with a bigger frog. I'm paraphrasing, but that was kind of the idea. And so I really try to get, my biggest project or my hardest project or just the thing I really don't want to do, get that done first. And then I find that I have that behind me. And for the rest of the day, I'm like, well, at least I got that done and I can check my list. So the kind of, micro visualization of how my mornings will be and the doing of the thing that I either least want to do or is the hardest first thing in the morning just helps to set my day up for success.
No, I love that. I find this mantra of win the morning, it just sets your whole day, right? And
I love win the morning, totally.
Yeah, it's just it's such a powerful thing. And if you can kind of get ahead of your competition and it's a real superpower. I think what's interesting, do you know Guy Fieri, the chef / entrepreneur food host? He's he's just got this huge contract with Food Network. I think he's making $80 million a year. But he has a thing where once the schedule is set at 5 p.m. the day before, that's it. Nothing can happen. So he can hit the ground running. He knows what's happened. There's no surprises. Mm-hmm. To your point, he can visualize and kind of win the day. And there's something powerful about being intentional, being focused, being listen, I'm so serious about my time management that once the schedule's set, it's set. And it just alleviates so much more stress because you're not letting other things sneak in. It does take a lot of discipline. And not everybody loves it, but even Guy Fieri, who to be that successful, and that was one little tip I picked up from a podcast about that idea. Like once the schedule's set, 5 p.m., 24 hours out, that's it.
Yep.
Tell me about, we're wrapping up here. Tell me about what you're reading, watching, just some fun cultural stuff you can share with the audience.
Yes.
Something frivolous or serious or whatever you want.
Well, something frivolous. My favorite TV show ever is NCIS, and people always giggle about that because it seems so out of character. But I just love NCIS. I have from the first episodes, and so I watch those, and some episodes I probably watched like 6, 7, or 8 times. But they give me
that is amazing.
Yeah. It's very strange. And then in terms of my reading, it's a little bit more in line with what you would imagine, if you know me, what I read. So I've been really enjoying Ryan Holiday. I saw him speak at a conference in January. I've been following him on Instagram for a while, but I saw him speak at a conference in January. So I just started The Obstacle is the Way.
Yep.
I like his very kind of, strict, stark approach to a very disciplined approach to life. That resonates with me. So I bought all his books. And so I'm going to probably be reading Ryan Holiday for quite some time. But the last book that I read was a book that was gifted to me by a dear friend in LA called Fierce Fairy Tales by Nikita Gill, who is a British writer and poet. And it's a rewriting of some of the traditional fairy tales with powerful women in mind.
I love it.
It was a wonderful read, not ever something that I would have picked up myself. It introduced me to a new author who was not at all on my radar. But I've gifted it to a couple girlfriends, and I'm going to gift it to my goddaughters. It's a very I think relevant reinterpretation of fairy tales with strong women as characters. So that is.
I love it. The female is future.
Yes.
The future is female. As I butchered
it. The future is female.
As a white guy, it's over for us, but it was a good run. No, I love that. That sounds like I should get that book for some of my children who are young ladies. No, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. Ada, thank you so much for making the time. If people want to follow up with you or follow you, what's the best way?
Yes. Thank you, Mark, for having me. I always so enjoy our conversations, recorded or not. But if you are interested in learning more about my brand, all of our social media is at Alchimie Forever. And then I'm at Ada Polla. You can message me, Instagram message me, whatever channel is best. My email is ada@alchimie-forever.com. Email is still great. So thanks for having me. Thanks for giving me an opportunity to share a little bit about myself and my brand and our story. And always.
No, thank you so much for making the time. And no, it was great. Before I let you go, any predictions? How are you feeling about the NFL draft?
Oh Lord.
That's a good analysis.
No comment. But your Detroit team is due for something magical this year. How about that?
Don't put any pressure on us. I mean, we want to be underdogs like Alchimie Forever. We want to be, like just kind of, doing our stuff, making a difference. Yes. We'll see. I don't know. Being a Lions fan is not for amateurs. That's for sure.
Well, go underdogs. That's for sure.
Ada, thank you so much for doing this. We will see you soon.
Thanks, Mark.